Hello and welcome back to the Alchemical Arts. Hope everybody is well today out there, and I thought we'd revisit some ochre stuff today. I know I've been working on the Maya blue pigments, but mostly I wanted to jump into some ochre stuff today because I went out over the weekend hunting for ochre because I needed some more and I wanted to drive out to some new places and have a look around. So I headed up northwest from where I am in Ballarat here into some traditional gold fields, which I knew would be filled with a lot of quartz and a lot of iron oxide deposits, being a sort of dry, kind of rough landscape where traditionally gold mining happened in the 19th century. So I thought that would be an interesting place to explore, and I came across some really nice yellow ochres, as well as a few reds and browns and things like that, and I was really happy with the colours that I had found, so I thought I'd do another little ochre processing video because I looked back to the previous ochre processing video I did over a year ago now on this channel, and the ochre samples I had at the time were again local ones from where I was living, which is closer to Melbourne, which is the capital of Victoria down here, and they weren't really that nice. They were like sort of soft, subtle browns and stuff like that, and that's fine, but the colour that I found this weekend was just so much better. And I actually found it, and this is probably one of my favourite places to go looking for ochre, is actually, you know, when they're building highways, or when they have built highways going through kind of slightly undulating hillsides, they tend to cut away some of the side of the road there so that they can make the road easier to go through rather than having to have such massive inclines. And often what happens is you get a cutaway on the side of the road that's, 3 or 4 meters high on a nice sort of gentle gradation, and what it does is it exposes all of the layers on the side there, so you get these often in the right places. You get, as the rain comes down and washes it away, you'll get these gradations of ochre deposits, particularly, well, here in Australia you're doing, particularly in the gold fields here, and so you have these wonderful exposed, almost like sedimentary style layers of ochre, so it's really easy just to pull over onto the side of the road, making sure you've got enough space so that you're safe from the oncoming traffic, and you can just go and grab little bits of it off the side there, and I don't really feel like anyone's going to complain if you're picking up a few rocks off the side of the road, particularly on a highway. It feels a little bit less sacred than other places and stuff like that, and you're not damaging national forests and parks and things like that. So that's often one of my go-to places to go looking for ochre, is the exposed rock sides of the highways. Anyway, so let's jump in and have a look at some of the pieces that I found, because there's some particularly nice colours, and some of it's actually a lot softer than some of the ochre I've processed on here before. So we can go through some really simple processes of grinding it up, and we might even grind some up and see how it is without going through the washing and levification process. So we can compare just pure ground ochre to the washed and dried ochre. So let's jump in and have a look at the colours. So here we have the collection of ochre that I got, or at least just a few samples. I actually ended up with a nice big bucket. But this stuff here is the stuff that initially grabbed my attention. As you can see, it's a nice, fairly clean, uniform yellow colour, which is really good. It means that it's a nice hydrated iron oxide. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but all ochres are some variation of predominantly iron oxide. The yellow is a hydrated form. The red is an anhydrous form, which means it doesn't have the additional OH groups or oxygen molecules. And the browns and things like that have various other things like manganese and stuff in them. As you can see, I thought I'd just bring a few examples of some interesting bits here. So for example, this bit here has a bit of white clay through it, but it's got these sort of deeper sienna style colours, and then the lighter, more goldeny ochres. This one here, for example, is a good example of just a fairly solid, clean yellow ochre. This one's a little bit deeper in colour and might be a little bit more golden. and I just thought showing a few of these other like blocks here, it's interesting to note that sometimes you have these like reds on the outside, you know, where it's seemingly a bit more of an orangey ochre kind of color, but if you can get in there and break it open, you can see inside it's predominantly a yellow color with a few little discolorations through. So often it's worth breaking apart pieces to see what you're getting, and this was a piece that I broke off from a larger chunk that is clearly more orangey red sort of on the other side, but I thought this inside color variation I thought was just so interesting. You've got this sort of like green here from a different kind of oxidization. You've got this purpley bit here, this red bit, these yellow bits here. And if we just give this a little bit of water, you can see there all sorts of really beautiful color going through all of this sort of stuff. This I would separate down into individual chunks in order to maybe collect each color separately from each other, or I might just keep it because it's a nice display piece. But what I'm going to do here is, because I'm fairly confident most of these, if I break them open, so they're a lot softer than stuff I previously worked with. You can see the internals are nice, clean, ochre yellow color in there. So we're going to take like a piece like this, and we're just going to start to grind it up in the mortar and pestle, and we'll go through the leviation and washing process. So we have a trusty mortar and pestle here, and I've taken these little pieces here because I think they've got a really nice sort of deep yellow color. There's a little bit of red and discoloration on this piece, but the internal is really nice. And so maybe if I just take like a painting knife here and scrape a little bit of that off. But I think even just, we'll start with just these three pieces here. And we'll just go through a simple, and as you can see, I don't have to do too much. It's quite soft and powdery already, so after initial breaking up, even just pushing tends to, there you go, we got a nice yellow color already. So just a couple of gentle hits, and then just I like to do a bit of a rolling motion, because it sometimes makes it a bit easier to break up rather than bashing everything. But these bigger bits I like to bash. When you get a nice pure clean ochre, it tends to be a lot sort of almost powdery, chalky softness to it, as opposed to some of the harder, more rock-like ochres that you can find in some places. Already I've just reduced that down to quite a fine powder. Really nice stuff there. Really gentle, goldeny colour with a slight greeny undertone to it. So you have, after maybe a couple minutes of grinding, it's a fairly soft powder. There's still a bunch of little chunky bits in there, but that's okay. We're gonna give it a wash just to collect the finest stuff at the moment, and then with any of the larger chunky bits, I'm going to show you a different processing method afterwards. But I'm pretty happy with that so far. Nice color. It's really rich and vibrant. So let's move on to the washing and levigating stage. So now that we've got our ground ochre in there, the next stage is the leviation process, which is really a simple process of washing and letting heavier particles settle out to the bottom, and then quickly tipping off the liquid to collect the lighter, more colourful particles. So impurities that are in and amongst the ochre there will probably include some sort of sand and clay and things like that. Stuff that should be heavier in weight than a lot of the colouring materials. So what we're going to do is just place it in this beaker here, like so. I'll just give this a scrape out. Now, because I haven't perfectly ground this ochre in a preliminary grinding, there'll also just be heavier chunks of ochre that sink to the bottom, and we're going to collect that later, and we're going to do a different little grinding process. Now, I actually have freshly boiled water here that I'm going to be tipping in straight from the kettle. So it doesn't really matter how much you do, but enough to give a bit of distinction and volume to the process. I'm just going to spoon here, and the reason I use freshly boiled water is hot liquids allow for things to settle out quicker, so it's going to make the process a lot easier to decant off water and have pigments settle out than using cold water. So I'm giving it a really good stir to get everything hydrated, and I've got another larger container here that we're going to place everything in. So what I want to do is get the stirring really happening, give it a few seconds, maybe about this long, and then pour. And as towards the end, I want to slow down my pouring process, because I want to make sure that I leave behind in the beaker the heavier sediment. As you can see there, that's some of the heavier stuff that's got left behind in the beaker. And in the fresh new beaker, we're quickly seeing the particles settle out and separate down to the bottom. And what we're going to do is let that sit for a second, pour off some of the water, and then we will go through and we'll actually levigate this one too to separate any heavy particles that may have jumped across into this one as well. So we'll do a couple of back and forths between the containers. And there's probably still quite a lot of light colouring material in here that can be drawn off. So what I'm going to do here is add a bit of extra water into the original container here. See if we can't get a little bit more out. And I'm just going to swirl it like so. And I wanted you to get a better look at my pouring process while I'm doing that. So what I do, if you see here, I'm pouring very slowly, but I can see some of the heavier materials staying behind, and you want to avoid that from tipping over the lip here. There we go. Again, we've left it behind. So I'm just going to give this a second, as I said, to settle out and tip off some of the excessive water. So now I've let the water settle out. You can see down the bottom here there's a layer of the pigment settled, and then we have a slightly discoloured water. So to make my life easier, what I'm going to do is tip off a large chunk of this water back into the original container very slowly. As you can see here, the pigment is wanting to move up, but I don't want to lose any of it. So don't pour too quickly in this stage. In fact, this angle gives you a good indication of what I mean by just siphoning the top off. And there we go. So around about there I'm going to stop. And we have most of our yellow pigment that we've collected there. So what I'm going to do is actually take this one here, and I'm going to give this a stir, and we should get some more of the lighter pigment up into suspension. We're actually just going to pour it back into here now. Again, making sure that we leave behind what we don't need or don't want. And again, I'll let this settle out and then we'll tip this liquid off and then we'll go through collecting and drying the resulting pigment. But while we let this settle off, I'm going to do something with this original batch here and show you a little experiment I want to try to see if this works. Now I've got my Mulling here and my marble slab, and as I said, this yellow ochre is quite a nice color already and quite soft, and I don't know, it's just a really clean yellow ochre. There doesn't seem to be too many impurities in it. So what I'm going to try and do is just grind up the residual down here. So I'm just going to scrape it out, and this will have a bunch of sand and stuff mixed into it, but we're going to just see what it's like if we take this amount here and get the Mulling onto it and just give it a grind. It's so soft, it just wants to grind down to a fine paste quite quickly. And as you can see, it's a really beautiful golden color. And this is another way that if you don't want to use a mortar and pestle and you want to get the finest grind you can get from the beginning, you can take your loosely powdered ochre and take it onto your Mulling and your slab if you have one, and start working it up like this just with water, and you might be able to grind it down to a very, very fine paste that you can just use immediately as pigment, or mix it in with a binder like a watercolor binder, or you can dry it out and mix it with an oil and have pretty much workable pigment and paint immediately without any washing process or leviation, just because you've got such a pure ochre to begin with. It doesn't have too much sand or grit into it. So let's give that a go and see what that turns out like. So I'm just going to work this for a while until I've worked it into a perfectly fine paste. As you can see, there's all these rough, gritty bits still in there, but we're going to keep working that out on the slab here. So as you can see, I've worked it into a fairly smooth paste, but there does appear to be still some stuff that's quite stubborn and not really wanting to become perfectly smooth, but it's pretty good. So that does highlight the value of the washing process, because it does really help to eliminate any of the chunkier, heavier particles. But even just mulling up pure ochre, get a pretty nice result if your ochre is good quality to begin with. So I might collect this, and I might actually just take this and give this a wash, because this should yield an extremely fine, soft pigment, and anything that does settle out from here we know is definitely not ochre and definitely needs to be removed. So I'm going to clean this up, give this a wash, and we'll go through the last little process of this ochre processing video. So again, I've let it settle out, and I'm just going to pour off the liquid this time, but not all the way. I want to keep a little bit of the liquid, so I think I'll stop about there. So I've got a little bit of liquid, and I'm actually going to start to swirl it up to get the liquid to get the pigment resuspended in the solution. As I've got my filter funnel set up here, as you can see, we've got big white funnel on top, there's a flask, and then it's attached to the pump there. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to filter out the liquid and collect it in the top section here, so that we can make it much easier to dry the remaining pigment that we have in here. I thought I'd just show the filtering process because I haven't shown it in a while. And you could do this with a coffee filter or like a cloth stretched over a container, but obviously having the vacuum filter makes things a lot quicker. As you can see, it sucks it through really fast, the water. Some things really clog in filter paper, other things don't. The slightly larger particle size of the ochre means that it's quite a quick process to filter. So as you can see, there's just a little bit of heavier impurity still left in the beaker there, but mostly what we're doing is just sucking through clean water and collecting all of our pigment up here. You should be able to see there's a little bit of liquid on top there, but that'll quickly suck through and the surface of this will dry out. There we go. You can see it in real time, pulling all that water through nicely. And even though most of the water's gone through, I like to give it a little bit longer just to really, as you can see, there's still liquid coming through. We'll try and suck this ochre as dry as we possibly can, and then we'll take the piece of filter paper out to the sun and let that dry in the sun. As I said, that's a relatively quick filtering process. That was nice and easy, and we should have some nice, clean, finely powdered ochre after we're done. So here we have the ochre pigment after drying. I actually processed up a little bit extra, so this is more than what I ran through the filter funnel when I showed you, but it's exactly the same ochre, just nicely processed up. So let's just give this a little bit of a grind up now and see what that looks like in the mortar and pestle. So we'll get to see our finished product. And I think I might actually grind some of this up in an oil paint today because I bought of Watercolours, and as you can see, it's instantaneously extremely soft. It's because we've only collected the softest, finest particles, and all of the harder stuff has been washed out, levigated out, separated out, and now we're just left with clean, uniform coloured, fine, soft yellow ochre. That is just really nice. I'm really happy with this. It's absolutely brilliant. So already I've basically crushed it all up into a very fine powder. We have a really nice golden coloured ochre there. So as you can see, we started with a piece like this, and then through a bit of grinding, a bit of washing, filtering and re-drying and re-grinding, we're left with this beautiful, soft, powdery ochre. This one in particular is quite a pale yellow ochre. You can definitely get like deeper, more golden ochres, and this one has, I feel like, a little bit of a greenish undertone to it, which will make it sort of closer in some ways to a raw sienna, but not quite. It's still quite a yellow ochre. So let's grind it up with some oil and we'll get a nice look at what it looks like in oil paints, because we should get a really rich result. So let's do that. So I've just got a little bit of pigment out here on the grinding slab. I've got some linseed oil here, and I'm going to just put a tiny drop. One thing with oil paints to remember is you don't really want to use much oil. I may have used too much oil there already. One day I'll do a video about oil paint making, but for now we're just going to mix this in. This is quite an absorptive pigment. Ochres tend to be very absorptive, so they'll suck up a lot of oil. And we may need just a drop more. As you can see, it's kind of flaked together. But again, as I said, one of the key components to oil paint making is minimal oil. You really don't want to use too much oil, which is why making oil paints at home can be tough process sometimes. So what I'm going to do now is, wow, that's such a nice colour. Let's get our Muller in there and start trying to get this going. Again, might need a tiny drop more oil as this is quite dry. Yeah, let's add a tiny. Alright, let's try again. There we go. It's all just sticking to the side of the Muller. Oh, I forgot how much I like the smell of linseed oil. And again. Just constantly getting it off there. Grinding it, getting it off. It looks extremely stiff at this point, but as we work it into a proper paint, it should get a bit easier to work. Again, it's pretty dry, so it might need a tiny bit more water. By water, I mean oil. Complete opposite. So let's just do a tiny drop more. Really doesn't take much for oil paint to go from being too dry to too much oil. But we might have found our sweet spot now. I'm going to call it quits there on this, but you know, this is far from a perfect oil paint. It would need a lot more work, but it's nice, it's buttery, and you get a good indication of the color. It's this really beautiful earthy yellow color. This is a great example of a yellow ochre. Well, I hope you enjoyed that short video on processing up some yellow ochre that I was excited to find. I mostly just wanted to retouch on some of the ochre stuff, and I thought the color was really nice and was a lot better than some of the previous ochre examples I had shown on this channel. And again, just to reiterate that ochre processing and collecting is a really simple process. It is just a matter of grinding, washing, filtering, and drying again, and then regrinding to basically have a usable pigment. And you should be able to find various degrees of iron oxides and different hues and colors of browns and reds and things like that almost everywhere in the world. I mean, there's going to be places where there isn't iron oxide deposits, but a lot of places do have them. It's a kind of global thing. I'm not entirely sure the areas where you wouldn't find ochres, maybe tropical islands which are predominantly made of sand might lack in some of these things, but I don't really know. I'm not a geologist. But essentially, ochre is a really fun first pigment project. If you're looking to get into making your own pigments or working with your own colors, head out there and see what you can find. Be respectful of nature. Don't over harvest or destroy, you know, very fragile habitats, but just take small amounts and work them up and keep a little color diary. I know there's a lot of people out there who are obsessive about collecting ochres and have all arrays of different colors, and that's one of the beautiful things about earth pigments, is that they have such a massive array of colors. They're also really beautiful naturalistic colors. So like for me personally, if I was to do portrait painting, when I do portraits, I tend to start with yellow ochre as one of my main colors for laying down, you know, flesh tones and things like that. I find it a very useful color, even just for early sketching work. It's a very neutral soft color and works really well as an early stage of the painting, especially if you've got like a toned background, like a ground put down. Anyway, that's all for today, and I hope you enjoyed this short little ochre video. And next time I'm getting back to the Maya Blue stuff. I've made some headway with my experimentation, so I should be doing Maya Blue next, although I may squeeze in another lake pigment. I have a bunch more lake stuff coming, so that should be quite exciting. But yeah, stay tuned and stay safe out there, and see you all next time.